In my opinion, the two most important things we can teach our kids is critical thinking and decision making. If we can send our kids into the world with those two skill sets, the ability to critically think and decision-making skills, that kid will do well in life. Because at the end of the day, how they operate or how they survive is going to be based on those two things. I think the danger in being a critical thinker today is what we just spoke about, which is society and the cancel culture that we live in will quickly, reprimand you for that. And the pandemic did that, right? You saw people that were critical thinkers and were starting to ask. And when, in the world that we live in, and I don't want to go down this road, but with the cancel culture, it's almost very difficult to be a critical thinker.
So today, I actually have a colleague that is as passionate about his work as I am about mine. And I think it's awesome because it's all about humans and behaviors and relationships. So rather than have me tell you about this incredible entrepreneur, let me introduce you to Greg Witz. And he is the president and CEO of Witz Education and so much more. So welcome, Greg, to today's podcast. And thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you, Dr. Patty Ann. Super excited to be here. And we get to geek out a little bit on all the topics that you spoke about. And, look, I'm a huge believer when it comes down to one of the successes in life is our ability to manage our relationships in humans, right? So looking forward to today's conversation.
This is going to be awesome. Okay, so actually, let me ask you about what you just said. You said, and maybe I'm being picky, you said one of the successes. Mm-hmm. My thought is all success is based upon the ability to create, nurture, and sustain healthy relationships. Do you agree with that, or do you see that differently?
I 1,000% agree. And, I said sort of one of the successes, but we might say that is the foundational or the most important, right? I mean, we're a herd creature, animal, right? We live in communities, we live in a village where, there's that wonderful saying, which is it takes a village to raise a kid. And at the end of the day, what would we be without the people in our lives, our relationships, right? Our parental relationships, our spousal relationships, our community. And we might even sort of take it to that, which is it's the community that needs to be looked after so much.
Mm-hmm. So when you say the community that needs to be looked after so much, are you suggesting more so than the individual?
No, I think it's sort of one and the same, or maybe two sides to a coin, right? Which is individuals contributing into the community and the community contributing back to the individual. I'm a big believer, and I was raised with this, and it's one of the foundational pieces that we work in the beginning of our training and programs, which is there's no substitute for taking responsibility.
Wait. You said that so fast. There's no such what? Oh, there's no substitute
for taking responsibility.
You sure you're not a New Yorker like me? That was fast.
No kidding, right? I'm a fast talker, but we have to be so accountable and responsible for how we are showing up, not just in our, call it professional lives for work, but what are we showing up or how are we showing up in people's lives, right? As a parent again, or as a spouse, like we have a lot of opportunity to operate with consciousness, right? We can be way better. We can serve, we can contribute to other people, communicating better and being healthier. And that simply comes from how I'm showing up, right? So back to the individual and community, what I'm doing individually in the community, right? The modeling, the behavior, how I respond versus react is the thing that contributes to or affects, right? AFF, the community in itself. And we could define the community as your culture at the office, or it's your home and your family. At the end of the day, I think it's really important that we recognize that we have an impact. And if you start to operate with more consciousness, you can understand whether your impact is coming across in a positive way, where we're positively impacting people and environments, or negatively, right? We all have a ripple effect, right? What that ripple effect is has a lot to do with where you start your self-awareness and your consciousness.
Okay, so that is. I couldn't imagine anybody feeling differently than from what you said. However, I want to get your thoughts on this. We today, everyone, no matter where you are, interestingly enough, since there has become an inordinate amount of ways to communicate, And the main goal of all communication is to connect. And yet, I would suggest we've never been so disconnected before. So my question to you is, how can you care about a community that you're not, I'll say, emotionally connected to? And let me just throw fuel onto the fire, because I believe many people are so disconnected from themselves. And if you're not connected to yourself, how on God's green earth can you possibly connect with somebody else?
Right. I'm smiling for the audience, that's listening to this from an audio standpoint. I'm smirking and I'm smiling because I've used that line myself, which is,
which one?
In the world of connection, we've never been more disconnected. We have.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay, great. There you go. I knew we were connected.
Right.
Pun intended.
We have tools in communication. We have an opportunity to build such deep connections and relationships. And in some regards, it's those same tools that are creating disconnection. I mean, let's just talk about the virtual sort of hybrid world right now. And I'm dealing with this with a lot of my clients, right? My clients will call and they'll say, teams are feeling disconnected. People are feeling disconnected from their bosses. Bosses are feeling disconnected from their teams. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, when was the last time you were in an office together? When was the last time you went out for lunch together? When was the last time you got together as a group and you just spent time physically with each other? And I'll have to credit my client for saying this. He said, and because it's his line, he says, sometimes these virtual walls are thicker than the actual concrete walls in the office. So back to your question, which is,
all right, may I interrupt for a moment?
For sure.
In the event that listeners are interpreting what you're saying as that virtual gets in the way of connection, I think the problem is people are trying to solve a new paradigm issue with old paradigm skill sets. I will tell you, as a working mom, we have begged our entire careers to be able to work remotely. Begged, right? And, I'll say respectfully, all the old white men that are running these companies are not in our shoes. So you're chuckling. For the people that are listening, he's right. Trying to be nice, but I know he's going to slam me for a moment.
Right. Now, I agree with
what I think, what I think is going on is companies that have virtual and people are feeling disconnected. And oh, by the way, that happens in person a lot also. But there's a lot of false narratives going on and denial. But what I've done with the companies that I work with that are virtual is that you have to then make a conscious effort to reach out virtually and just see how. I've said to people, when's the last time you spoke to someone and just asked him how he's doing? I said, give it a try. This is how it's going to go. Hey, Joe, how you doing? Good. Because Joe's thinking, what do you want? What do you need? What are you going to complain about? Say, no, just wanted to touch base to see how you're doing. Okay. Right. And then Joe's going to text his colleague to say, anyway, so you need to make that effort. And then once a quarter, which really happens pretty fast, you have an offsite. Anyway, that's my solution to the whole.
So I agree with you. And to the side of virtual, I'm not slamming virtual saying it's bad. In fact, what's actually been proven over the last couple of years is that companies have been as effective and efficient, in fact, sometimes even more efficient and effective, and had better revenue numbers for the last couple of years than they did in person. I think the advantage, and as you said, as a working mom, having the opportunity to start your day with your family, not have that travel, be able to be available, be present with not just our kids, but be able to have that presence in work. This is the advantage of the virtual world. The disadvantage, and I think what most people do, is we don't make these changes in incremental swings. We take these massive pendulum swings, right?
Well, we had to with COVID, right? That was thrust upon us.
Correct. But as we've gone through that, we've swung now, or we've kept that swing where we're not coming back to the office. One of the biggest challenges in North America right now is actually getting people to come into the office, right? In fact, for talent acquisition, if people are not advertising or marketing these jobs as hybrid, as remote, they are getting 0 applicants. Now, I'm a fan of all of this, but I'm also aware that, back to us being a herd mentality, we need to be around each other. And I
And
don't
for the
know.
listeners, I just want you to know this is like a gift, because you have two people that are so focused and committed to relationships, right? So it's about the human connection. It's not just the productivity. So go ahead.
Right. So, maybe an offsite once a quarter isn't enough, but forcing people to come in the office every single day, that's also not the answer either. It's about having a really strong balance. And I think maybe that's part of the answer for all life, which is, what do we do to create balance? Even the work-life balance statement that's been thrown around for the last few years is BS, in the sense that, it's not about having work-life balance. It's about having a balanced life. It's about
work-life balance at the end of your life.
Correct.
At the end of your life, will you feel you have? Correct.
Right. So what could we do to create balance, right? And, we were sort of floating across this, but what is the greatest way to teach? What's the greatest way to influence? What's the greatest way to lead?
Wait a minute. Hang on a second, Greg. Go back to the conversation, though, about the individual being disconnected and the community, because I interrupted you. You were saying that your clients have called you and said, we're so disconnected. And I when they say about culture, many times I say, every time you hear a company tell you, or a boss tell you they want you in the office every day for culture, just exchange the word control.
Right. Correct. And if we're going to define culture, by the way, culture is defined by attitudes and behaviors. It's a very tangible thing, not this mystical, warm, fuzzy thing. Most people will describe culture through feelings. This feels like a really cool place to work, right? We have lots of fun here, right? It's a happy place. But culture is very much defined by the attitude, my mindset, right? So how I'm showing up. Am I showing up pessimistic or optimistic? Am I critical or am I open? And then my behavior and my actions that support that. So back to being disconnected. Let's give this example, right? Think about dating, right? What's the greatest advantage of this digital sort of technology world? Well, we have access to relationships and people that we might have never had access to because we were regionally set up, right? So now all of a sudden, and that can also go into work, right? I get to work with a copywriter in Italy, and I get to have a social media person in LA, and so on and so on and so on. So that's the borders or the boundaries have now been opened, right? But if we come back to an intimate relationship, right? If we meet each other virtually, right? And we're starting to get to know each other and we're building a relationship, there has to be the next stage where we are physically together, and not in a weird, perverted way, but in a way that we got to be around each other.
Oh, an intimate relationship, 1,000%.
Right. But we might argue, or we might acknowledge the fact that our professional relationships are sometimes just as close and connected and intimate, right? Not in a sexual way, but in an intimacy way where I'm invested in and I'm involved in your life. In fact,
well, if you want to use intimacy as being vulnerable, you can be vulnerable in ways that aren't just, sexual.
Right. Correct. Right. Have you, there's a guy that came up with a trust formula that says we can quantify trust in a relationship. We can
Stephen Covey?
Not Stephen Covey. I think
Stephen M.R. Covey, the son.
Yeah. No, it wasn't him. It was Charles Green. He might have used it, but it says this: trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation, right? So I'm coming to you as a therapist or as a coach, right? All right. So Dr. Patty Ann, does she have the credibility? Yes. You're a PhD in clinical psychology. You've got 2 MBAs. You've got a business. You're credible, right? You've got the skill and the knowledge, right? Reliability. Are you present in my sessions? Do you show up, right? And reliability might be as simple as people showing up late, right? So you're sitting around in a meeting. It's been 12, 15 minutes. The person's not there. They stroll on in. Well, you're always late. So that's now attacking the reliability. But reliability is basically showing up. Right. Intimacy. I like the way you describe that. Vulnerability, interest in the other person's life, right? I know about your family. I know we've spent time together. We have a social intimacy, a social connection. I could be perfect in those areas. What disrupts the trust is self-orientation. The higher the self-orientation score, the lower the trust factor.
So you're talking about emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Is that what you mean?
Partly, yeah. Right. So let's go back to the self-orientation. Does it serve my team and does it serve my community to show up more, let's say in a physical space as an office together, right? Does that allow me to operate with more others orientation, right? Maybe.
Right.
But
okay, good. I'm glad you said that.
right. But back to sort of what we talked about with this disconnection, I think what's also challenging with all of this is we're not present a lot in these conversations. We're literally running from meeting to meeting to activity to task, and it's functional, right?
Or multitasking while you're there.
Correct. So the presence isn't there, and therefore sort of the disconnection is contributed to. So look, I think we're living in some interesting times right now, but one of the things I really want to emphasize to the audience is you have a responsibility to be better tomorrow than you were today. You have a responsibility to show up in ways that are going to contribute to the health and the well-being of not just yourself, but others as well. And if we can all operate with a little bit of this, we just might start to find that we're finding connection again. And I was using the example earlier with an intimate relationship where you're dating someone. You might meet them through that virtual world, but until we actually start hanging out with each other, dating, physically being with each other, we're never going to build that connection. I mean, maybe you'll agree with this. We're primitive human beings, right? We're
mammals.
We're mammals. We're not that. Yes, we've got a frontal lobe, and we've got the ability to problem solve and make decisions, and process information from our environment and think about our feelings. Even though we know that we feel before we think, we have this capacity. But at the end of the day, it is the primitive stuff that contributes to that connection. And that's where I want to remind people, well,
because it is a primal need to be connected.
Correct.
If you leave someone with everything that they would need on a deserted island, I think they'll die after exit. Years ago, there was a failure to thrive if you don't touch people.
Right. I mean, look at isolation. Isolation is one of the worst things you could do to a human being.
Correct.
Right? In fact, there's laws for prisoners of war that you're not allowed to keep them isolated. Right?
It'd be nice if they followed them, but whatever. It's war. It's crazy, right?
But isn't it along this line, which is us all sitting in these Zoom rooms in our own houses, we're isolating in some capacity? Right?
Of course.
Right. So I think once again, where we start to say is we take these extreme pendulum swings instead of now moving things a little slowly back. And I agree, the old white man that says, get your ass in the office because it's about culture. No, that's about control. That's about their preference. That's about their need, which is another type of self-orientation, right? The ultimate question we might want to ask to ourselves is our friendships, our business relationships, our teams that we're working on, have I shown up today that's contributed to them in a positive way, right?
Yeah, hang on 1 second. Before you go further, I just want to go to what you said about the pendulum swinging. My understanding is that most paradigm shifts happen suddenly. It's not the drip, drip, drip. So if depending upon where you sit on this conversation in the opinion area here, COVID allowed for I truly believe not that in our lifetime, we are going to look back. Look, I'm not there now, but I was a native New Yorker. I know my family is in New York. I know plenty of people that I used to call it the cattle car. Get on the train, go to work. Like many people will tell you the hardest part of their day is the stupid commute, the exhaustion, right? I think we're going to look back on that in 10, 20 years and say, that was insane. Why did we ever think we had to do that? And unless there was COVID, right? And there's always a yin and a yang. There's always an upside to a negative and a negative to a positive, right? We said that before. We never would have made that shift.
Correct. And, the new or the new school sort of tech companies were doing this, right? And, traditional organizations would say, oh, look at those tech companies, right? With their foosball tables, but they were on to something, right? I remember I had a client years and years and years ago in the tech industry. He was a very early adopter of remote work, right? And a lot of the staff were analysts and coders and stuff. And he's like, look, most of these individuals want to work in the evening. All I need to
Right.
know is, are we meeting milestones, right?
Right.
And I remember thinking,
Is the work getting done?
is the work getting done? And I have another client that said to me, Greg, look, there's no reason for us to call people back to the office right now, because the truth to it is people are more efficient and effective at home, right?
Mhm.
We did better last year than we've done any previous year. But that same person said to me, one of the things that we need is we need our leaders leading the human beings, and we also need them managing the business. Now, I think managing the business, they've answered through that virtual, but it's about how do you lead human beings through a screen? You know, sometimes that creative chaos, that interruption during the day, where you have those magical moments of connection, the magical moments of innovation and ideation, those moments of what we call creative combustion, where all of a sudden I come in and I walk in your office and I disturb you. Hey, Dr. Patty Ann, listen, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Knock, knock, knock. Can I speak to you for a second? What do? You roll your eyes. Like, oh, what do you want? Okay, fine. Come on in. And you stop doing what you're doing. We get into it. And then next thing you know, we've created this thing. That would never happen because we had a scheduled Zoom, right? So I think when you were talking about the pendulum swing, where we need these massive pendulum swings to evoke change, yes. And now what we need to do is we need to evolve, right? The change has happened. The impact has happened. And COVID for us was good. We scaled, right?
I was going to say, you're an online business, right? You do online education.
Correct. And, you know, once upon a time, 4 years ago, if you said to me, Greg, would you go live in Costa Rica and run all your executive coaching and training through virtual and online? I would have said, you're mad. I said, the only way to actually be effective in this industry is in a room with people physically there. Now, what we've had to do in our coaching and our online delivery, like virtual delivery, is a tremendous amount. I mean, we broadcast, we don't Zoom, we have 8 camera shoots, we have experience boxes. So we've had to spend and reinvent, we have had to spend a ton, and then we've had to reinvent a lot to ensure that we're creating that connection, that intimacy, that experiential stuff that you get in a room. But
right. So you created new ways to solve a new issue.
Correct. But one of the things we've also very much emphasized is a combination of both. We can't just be online. We can't just be virtual. We need the balance of in person and in live. And, you know, I think if businesses took that approach as well, which is it isn't about you need to be in the office 2 days a week and 3 days remote, but what are we doing to balance our virtual time with our time together? And as you said, if that's once a quarter, amazing. But nothing.
Well, along with other things, like what you were just saying about leaders having to, I'm not even going to say lead or manage. I'm going to say connect and have a relationship where it's, you know, there's that expression, nobody cares about how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, interestingly, I have had clients tell me that their younger children in their 20s and early 30s will say, I don't want to be friends with the people I work with. I don't care. I just have to work with them, and I want to work with them. And I will tell you, I've heard other people say that too. Oh, why don't you move to this community? A lot of people in your industry work there. And they said, I have to work with these people. I sure as hell don't want to live with them.
Yeah, that's sad though, right? I mean, you spend 80% of your time in your professional lives. Right?
Well, it's sad. However, if, as we're speaking now and recording this, Goldman Sachs just said they're laying off 3,200 people, right? So all of a sudden you're friends until it's between me or you getting laid off.
Well, I think it was is it Jamie Dimon that owns Goldman Sachs?
No. Jamie Dimon owns JP Morgan. He doesn't own anything. He gets paid like he owns it. He's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase.
Correct. I mean, he announced, I think this was
Barry Solomon, David Solomon is the CEO of Goldman.
So Jamie Dimon said this last year where he was like, you get your ass back in the office or you're fired. Right?
Pretty much that's how he said it. Right. As he's living in his penthouse and, you know, takes an elevator down.
Correct. And here's the other problem to that, which is back to leadership. Leadership is more about modeling and role modeling versus anything else. Right. So it's easy to say things. But let's come back.
Well, actually, I'll play devil's advocate with that, though. He probably is in the office when he's in the office. But when's the last time he had to worry about his kids and I think his children are grown, but his kids being picked up from school or somebody being sick and has to stay home. And by the way, Jamie Dimon was anti-working from home way before COVID. He was almost militant about it, right? So sounds a little controlling to me.
It is. And, let's come back to people getting laid off, because that was Goldman Sachs laying off 3,200 people, blah, blah, blah. These are your friends, and I don't want to be friends with people. Well, first, that shouldn't and doesn't have to, maybe I say it doesn't have to, affect your personal relationship or your friendship with this team member, right? Yes, people operate with self-preservation and survival, but at the end of the day, if people are getting laid off, it's not that...
well, it's not personal in a bizarre way.
There's many factors that go into laying off. That decision,
and Wall Street's also unique, by the way, right?
Correct. And that decision could be made not out of individuals' performance, but just out of titles. Like, all right, we're removing 30% of these titles. People with this type of salary need to reduce by 10%. So it's a black and white. We call them the butcher, the ultimate analyst, the ultimate rational, logical Spock, right?
Also known as the CFO.
Also known as the CFO. How could you make a decision? Because, by the way, sometimes the HR individual or people, there's too much empathy to do so. So it's a pure mathematical equation. And yes, sometimes if you come from the Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, he said he was fired at the bottom 10%. And what that did
and look at where they are today too, but whatever.
Right. But that created a high-performing organization, and specifically within the sales groups, what it became wasn't about me achieving my objective. It came to me about beating you. I didn't want to be the last one in the race. I had to always be ahead, and that becomes the joke around what do you need when you shark dive, right? You need a friend, and you need a little pocket knife. And hopefully that friend's also a little bit of a slower swimmer.
Well, then it became about competition as opposed to collaboration.
Correct. And in my experience in the corporate world, and you probably see this as well, every year there's a new buzzword, like coaching became a big buzzword.
Entrepreneurial too. Yeah.
Entrepreneurs, collaboration, culture, right? Connection, hybrid. Like there's always a new sort of emphasis and word that corporate wants to push. But let's come back to what we said. We spend, or at least before COVID, we were spending up to 80% of our time in our professional lives. That means
that's amazing.
You spent more time with your peers than your own children and your spouse, right? If I'm spending that much time with someone, I would hope that I've got a good relationship and some sort of a friendship there. Because without that, that would be a pretty crappy thing to do.
We'll like each other, like you enough.
Right. We've moved to Costa Rica and, we've had to rebuild our community here. And my friend said this to me. He said, what's so amazing about what you're doing? You get to really define the friendships and the relationships. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, most of us end up with relationships and friendships because of history, right? We grew up together. We might not actually have a deep connection, but I still invite you to my party every year because we've been friends for 30 years, right? You get to really define what those relationships look like. And I thought that was interesting. And then I started to bump into people where I'm like, I don't really like these people, right? Not all of them. There's some amazing people, but there's a few of them I'm going, this is not my cup of tea. This is not, I don't know if I'd be friends with this person without these. And I found myself sort of moving into this critical mindset. And I reminded myself that, wait a minute, I need to also be a steward in my community. And there's a new expat community here, and I can contribute to this community and build friendships. And through that exercise, I found common ground and connection, and actually found, in quotations, and for the audience, I'm doing air quotations right now, that I've developed more of a fondness and likability with these individuals, right? Which only happened because of the exercise of showing up like that. And maybe if we did that in our professional lives as well, which is, okay, technically, I don't know if I would be friends with you, but let me try to build a friendly relationship with you. Let me look for some commonality and find some ways. And, I fly around the world. I meet a lot of people. I do a lot of different work in coaching and training, and even in my own team. And I work very hard. And when I say very hard, I intentionally, right, try to build a friendship with you. right?
Mhm.
And even though sometimes I've had to terminate you as the boss, or we've had to sort of lay you off, or we've had to have difficult conversations, or all along these lines, and I've said this for years, I don't know if I really want to work with anyone unless I have that type of friendship with them, right? Because we do spend so much time together. And then back to what we started today's episode around, which was community. Once again, how I, as an individual, is showing up in that community is going to contribute to the energy, the vibe, the community, the behaviors that we demonstrate. And I'll repeat this, I'm a believer in the ripple effect, right? Your ripple effect can be small or big.
Well, emotions are contagious, right? Somebody walks into the room happy, you feel it. Somebody walks into the room like Eeyore, and you're like, ugh, just the whole energy goes down.
Correct. So, we're living in.
So you had said we're living in interesting times, right? I mean, I want people to hear more of your brilliance on another topic, but I think part of the difficulty, and I would agree with you. I mean, who wants to spend 80% of your time with people that you don't like at all? But I think the whole tribalism is playing into that, and the whole if you're one side of the aisle as opposed to the other, we can't be friends. It's just that it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. But I was thinking about what you were talking about, and I was reading some of your stuff, and you say something that I say all the time when I meet people, and it's, how may I help you? So it sounds like that's a cornerstone for a lot of your work and how you show up. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I'm a believer in serving. Simple. Sometimes people don't know how to ask for help. And if you're aware and you're conscious and you operate with the mindset of service and helping, you just might save that person's life. Sometimes literally, right? This work that I came into, I fell into, right? I did not, wake up and say, this is what I want to do with my life. My father was the one that started the company originally. And at young age 20, I found myself doing some work and, having to work there, and it was difficult. But then I got exposed to a lot of the programming and the concepts of clinical psychology and a number of others. And I got really into it. And I don't know where it comes from. But I do know that my purpose every day is to contribute to us being a little bit better tomorrow. And hopefully, if once again, back to the ripple effect piece, if I could do that for you, then maybe you could do it for someone else, right?
Mm-hmm. Karma.
Yeah.
And paying
karma.
it forward.
Paying it forward, exactly. I mean, how many times have you let someone in when you're driving a car, right? You come from New York, right? Maybe you took a lot of the train there, but definitely New York traffic or LA traffic, Chicago traffic.
Crazy. It's crazy.
Right? What happens when someone wants to merge into the lane? It's the first thing people do.
Speed up.
Speed up, and they close the gap.
Yeah.
Think, why? What's going on? And this becomes the I mentality, and I own the road, and it's my right to drive, and you will not get into the lane, right? What happens if you slow down and you make some eye contact and you're like, come on, go ahead? What happens to that person? It's the first thing they do. They smile. And then what do they do when they merge into the lane? What's the first thing they do? They stick up their hand and they wave and they say, thank you.
Right? Sometimes they don't, and that pisses me off.
And that was going to be the next one. And what happens when you do, and they merge into the lane and they don't say thank you? You get pissed off. Maybe you flash your lights. Maybe you pull up next to them. Maybe you give some silence. Maybe you grumble.
I just like, whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's the danger next time someone wants to merge into the lane?
Hopefully you won't. But then you're like, oh, this happened once before. That's the brain memory. I'm not going to let you in.
Correct. And I don't let you in. And if I'm not careful, I start to do this unconsciously. And if I'm starting to do that on a road, what happens in like a grocery store? What happens in an email, right? We're colleagues. And I'm like, hey, can you help me? Well, that's not my job. It's not my problem. Man, that's a really sad, dangerous place to be. Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful of human beings, we have a propensity to be selfish, right? And if that swings too far, that community, this world, this village, what we're trying to achieve, right, is jeopardized.
I would argue it has already it has already swung too far.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe, and to that point, if it's swung too far, it hasn't swung. It can swing the other way as well.
It's still swinging.
Exactly. And, that's the analogy of like momentum, right? Which is,
right.
It's really hard to, start something without inertia behind it, right? There's a great example, which
Physics.
is physics, which is there's a big train and there's a little rock in the wheel and the train's not moving and the train now starts to try to move and it can't, right? Because it's this tiny little rock. Versus when the train is bombing down the tracks, right? That little rock will get smashed. So maybe what we need to do is with this swing and take that inertia, take that momentum, and start to swing it back the next way. And this is how do we do this for the audience? Be the wind in someone else's sail, right? I like what you said earlier. Call a friend, and I picked up my phone because my buddy sent me this earlier. I'm going to read it to you. Just a simple line. Haven't spoken to him. Okay, the last time we spoke, mid-December. So it had, a few weeks. Anyway, I got this message.
Weeks, yeah.
Yeah, a few weeks, even longer. This is the message I get from him. Bro, ! Have an epic week. And I'm like, that's amazing. I said, thanks, brother. You too, right? And we just started doing that social and connection thing. And as we said, phone a friend, call a friend, send a message, reach out to someone. Leaders, let's get people back together again. Doesn't have to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but let's create opportunity to break bread together. Let's take an opportunity to brainstorm together, to work together, to create together, to organize, to be together. Because nothing is more important than that. And at the end of the day, I might be wrong in saying this, so maybe you'll counter it or add to it a little bit. We are not going to be able to have the success organizationally and relationally if we do not take time to be together. Simple, right?
Well, 1,000%. But and to your point, though, it's not just the work together; it's the community. 1,000%. And that's why when people get so tribal and nobody. The issue is, and you're involved with education, so maybe you can address this, because I do want you to talk about all your gifts to the world in your work. To me, the ability to critically think, not to be told what to think, to critically think. And so, a great, and when I'm working with clients and anyone, executives, anyone, and I'm trying to, we now know we can teach empathy. It's not this woo-woo thing. And we know we can increase our emotional intelligence. And one of the ways we do that is to gross oversimplification, right? Walk a mile in the other person's shoes. Feel what they feel. We know now that emotional motor resonance creates motion resonance. Motor resonance creates emotional resonance. So when we watch a show, even though we know it's a show, we feel the emotions because our brain lights up as if we're doing it. That creates the ability to understand, to create empathy. But you have to be willing to move from your position. And I feel like that's where we're getting stuck today. And in business, we need to be able to see the other truth for the most part, religion aside, for people, not to offend anybody, it's subjective. But everybody acts as if their truth is the only truth. And I have no reason to hear the other side.
When mid-pandemic, I added a little title to my Instagram, right, where it said encouraging dialogue. Right? It says Greg Witz, CEO and president of this company, host of this podcast, speaker, author, blah, blah, blah. And the next one said encouraging dialogue, because I believe that one of the things that's been lost, specifically of the pandemic, but not just the pandemic, over the last several years, is the willingness to listen and debate and discuss.
Healthy debate.
Correct. Once upon a time, you'd be like, well, I think the sky is blue. And I'd be like, well, actually, there's some clouds in it. And we would get into a discussion. I would say, Dr. Patty Ann, tell me more about that. Like, what makes you think the sky is blue or green or red or whatnot?
What I say all the time is, help me understand that.
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
Dialogue with me. And, isn't dialogue and storytelling and communication foundational to who we are as human beings, right?
Everything is a story.
Everything, and
we all have our stories.
And one of the things that we know about the brain is we think and feel with stories, right? We see in stories, we process in stories. But you talk about empathy and stuff, and I remind people a lot about this because you said, yes, empathy can be learned. There's a side of your personality, your nurturing side, which operates forgiving. And in my world, we call it the nurturing parents, right? So what does a nurturing parent look like in a leadership role? That's someone that's coaching and mentoring and helping and guiding their teams. What does it look like as a parent? Someone that is supportive and caring and patient and understanding. What does that look like in your intimate relationships, your spousal or your partner relationships? That looks like support and you're contributing to their success. One of the things that we know about this side of your personality is it is learned. You're not born with this nurturing side, but you learn this side of your personality. It develops, it grows. And of course, that comes from your immediate parental relationships, right? But the nurturance, your experiences, your relationships along the way. So if that is true, then back to your point, we could not just learn empathy, but we can actually learn how to contribute to the community way better. And this now negates the arguments of, well, that's just not who I am.
That's just the way I am. Yeah.
Right. Well,
that's why I don't like, quite frankly. Well, no, that's why I think a lot of the tests, the Colbys, the discs, what people, well, that's just who I'm a quick start. I'm like, yeah, but you got to finish stuff.
Right. And, you were talking about sort of why we're not maybe open to other people's ideas. I think what we do in today's society and world is we have so much information that we use this information to argue our point, right?
Not to learn.
Not to learn. It becomes to reinforce my perception or my position, right? This is not just something that I believe. Look, I looked it up on Google and there it is, right? And people miss the point with all of this, right? So you were talking about critical thinking before. There's two things I want to teach my kids. All right. Well,
how many kids do you have, Greg, and how old?
I got 2 kids. They're 6 and 8.
Okay. Oh, so you're still in the la land, rainbows and lollipops.
Yeah. Although, my 8-year-old today is like, it's
coming to a crash. It's ending soon. It's on the horizon.
Right. What's the joke? When I was 8, I was putting peanut butter in the dog's mouth to see if the dog can talk. Today, an 8-year-old is coding and Googling and writing. Yeah. And just incredible.
But they're still only 8.
Yeah. But if there are only 2 things I can teach my kids, this would what I would teach them. And this is, in my opinion, right? Not my advice. In my opinion, the 2 most important things we can teach our kids is critical thinking and decision-making. If we can send our kids into the world, right, with those 2 skill sets, the ability to critically think and decision-making skills, that kid will do well in life, right? Because at the end of the day, how they operate or how they survive is going to be based on those 2 things. I think the danger in being a critical thinker today is what we just spoke about, which is society and the cancel culture that we live in will quickly, reprimand you for that. And the pandemic did that, right? You saw people that were critical thinkers and were starting to ask. And when, in the world that we live in, and I don't want to go down this road, but with the cancel culture, it's almost very difficult to be a critical thinker, right?
Well, everybody's in their echo chamber, right? Like, without getting into politics, if you turn on Fox if you want one opinion, you turn on CNN if you want another opinion, and never the 2 shall talk, right? Because when somebody tries to encourage that conversation, to your point, you get canceled.
Yeah.
So how have you seen that show up in business? And then how do you take care? Because coaching, right? There's so many ways. Look, I'm not, you need to ask good questions in coaching, but I'm not someone that, asks 5 questions and they come to me. That just means you don't know what you're doing. But with coaching, you have to be able to challenge the premise of the leader. What do you do when a leader is in an environment where there's no ability to challenge the status quo?
Mhm. Well, that usually becomes the reason they're in coaching in the first place, which is I'm in this environment and I need to now impact. I find this in two different ways. If you're sent to be coached, like there's a performance issue, well, we need you to improve.
And by the way, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish the coaching was also for true growth and development and to be the best you, but nobody seems to want to go there. Entrepreneurs do, but not. That's been my experience, not the corporate world.
I do. I also find like, careered females are more open to the coaching than males are.
1,000%.
And it's, in the world today, you got to be careful even bringing that up. But I find if they've been sent to to be coached, it's like pulling teeth. At that point, you spend the majority.
It's almost a punishment.
It's a punishment. So we got two hurdles to overcome. One, moving them from prisoner to participant, which is I'm a prisoner, I have to do this, and how do we move them into a place of being more motivated and optimistic about the opportunity to learn and grow. That's number one. Number two, it's getting them to a position where they're more self-aware, right? And it's through those exercises we might be able to make an impact. But those are always very difficult coaching candidates and clients. The ones that are self-motivated or the ones that sign up themselves, they're easy, right? They're the ones that like, just give me the tools and what do I do? My style of coaching, and we were just chatting about this before we started recording, I also have a problem with the certified coach world. Right? You're getting these individuals running and doing a weekend course or this, modularized sort of activity over a year, and they come out with a stamp and they go, I'm a coach. And the first reason I ask them, why do you want to be a coach? And it's the worst answer I get is it's because I want to help people. And I'm like, you're the most selfish individual in the world because the only reason you're doing this is to be self-serving. So your ego and motivation and perception is that you've given, right? And I know I said earlier, part of my purpose is to serve and to help. That's a little bit different. I don't coach because I want to help people. I coach because in a lot of cases I have to.
What do you mean by that?
Well, coaching is a taxing exercise. It takes a lot out of an individual, right? Like as a therapist or as a psychologist and as a coach.
I'm a coach. I do the coaching. Yeah, I have that as the platform, but it's coaching and it's exhausting.
It's exhausting because you are emoting and
if you're in it,
and you're present, and you have to let go of whatever distractions and stresses and problems and tasks and things that you have to focus on, right? Because you have to give yourself to this other person, right? It's a selfless exercise, and that's draining. And if you're not careful, your cup depletes, right? And you're still coaching, and now you're coaching from a depleted cup. So that's sort of one.
But I will tell you, though, I do coach from a selfish perspective because I do truly believe it's one of my gifts. I don't have many. I have maybe two, and coaching. So it is selfish. I do feel like it is a gift that I have, and I have the responsibility to give.
Yeah, well, that's responsibility, not selfishness, right? That's you saying, look, I have this gift, and I have a responsibility to use it and to demonstrate and to deliver it, right? Otherwise, it's wasted talent. So, back to the certified coach, coming in here and asking questions like, what are your goals? And what do you think? Useless. Coaching has as much, who cares? Has as much to do with challenging their perceptions, guiding them, training, using tools. Sometimes my coaching sessions have me speaking and telling them more, right, than actually facilitating the conversation. It really depends on the candidate.
Yeah, I tell people sometimes you're never supposed to tell them what to do. Well, then they don't need you.
Correct, right? And I think about this. If I want to improve my golf swing, or pickleball's a huge sport lately, right? We've been playing a lot of pickleball.
Oh, right? You play? Do you play?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have to learn. I want to learn.
It's amazing. It's a combination. I was a tennis player.
Okay.
So pickleball's like that in between sort of ping pong and tennis. It's awesome. But what I love about it the most is the social community and the laughter and the getting together. But if I want to improve pickleball, right, and I call a coach, if he starts to ask me, what do you think would be some good goals for me to focus on? And how do you think I can get there? And it just went down that sort of question road. I would fire them. I'd be like,
I want to play pickleball. You tell me.
Tell me, what do I hold it like this? Should I swing like that? Where should I stand? Guide me, direct me, tell me. So that's a really important part for the coaches out there. I once posted a video.
Assuming you are in fact the expert, right? I'm not going to go to a poor man and ask him, how do I get rich?
Correct. And that's the other problem we see in the coaching world today, which is you got people that are like fresh 20 being life coaches.
Whatever that is. I don't even know what a life coach is.
Neither do I. And I once posted.
To me, it's get a friend.
Correct. I once posted a video that said, what advice would you give someone if they wanted to become a life coach? And my advice was, don't do it. Right? Because at the end of the day, you shouldn't be a life coach. Maybe what you should do is go and work, run a company, become an expert, go do all of that, become successful first. And then if you have a model that you get to share, or if you have a concept that works, or if you have tools that you've developed along the way. And I'll often ask this. In fact, in a meeting with a prospect last week, HR person, and she asked me, she's like, are any of your coaches certified? And I was like, here we go. And the answer is yes.
That's a classic HR answer. That's a classic HR question.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And I was like, and what I didn't tell her was, by the way, we don't actually send the certified coaches out to come and do this type of work because they are not equipped, nor skilled, nor experienced to actually go and do that work. But if you want the stamp, I've got a couple people on staff that have that stamp, right? Super easy for them to do. So that was sort of, the thought around certification. And I like what you said. If you're an expert, right, then you have something to teach. And if you have
how do you not a great word, but how do you vet your coaches? Like when I coach people so many times, I mean, I don't want to name names, but I've coached people that have had access to supposedly really good coaches or the coaches, and I wasn't so impressed.
If I was to be very truthful, they are far and few between. They are very difficult to find.
Correct.
As a training development company, as a coaching business that operates in this industry.
Yeah, that's what I do, but I'm just boutique. You're huge.
Right. Yeah. One of the most difficult things to do is to recruit facilitators and coaches.
So how do you do it?
A little bit of luck, a little bit of time, a little bit of right place, right opportunity. But what I look for mostly is if I'm speaking to someone, was I moved in that conversation? If I came and met Dr. Patty Ann and we were chatting away, and just in our interaction, I'm like, wow, that was super intelligent, or that was so helpful, or like, she said this and she said that. That's my first sort of cue, like ding, ding, like, wait a minute, hold on a second. This person's probably got something here.
I love that. I totally get that.
Right. Next thing.
So that's the first thing. Yeah.
Next thing, what does Dr. Patty Ann do? She's a PhD in clinical psychology. She runs a practice. Oh, so she's in it. She's doing it.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I do coaching and consulting. Exactly. So she's doing it. She doesn't say she's doing it. She's doing it.
She's doing it. Exactly. The third thing I look for is, what is your unique sort of unicorn special factor? One of the most recent coaches that we onboarded, it was about a year and a half ago, she's a specialist in emotional intelligence. It's all she does. Teaches emotional intelligence to leaders. Coaching emotional intelligence. Has spent years and years and years and years working these different models. She's also a facilitator background, and she's got all these other things. But when I met her, I was impacted. I was like, wow, I want to listen to her, right? So I think if we sort of go down that, when people show up with, hi, I'm interested in being a coach, here's my resume, I'm certified, there's a solid chance that like it doesn't even cross the desk. Because at that point, once again, it's someone checking the box. Oh, I've got this, I should be able to now do this, right? So
it's so interesting you say that. So I had somebody, as you know, coaching is now the new thing, the new best thing, right? So quite frankly, humbly, many people are asking me to come on board and to be a coach with them or for them. And one person asked me that was involved very high end, very connected, to run the coaching program, the executive coaching program, because of my skill set in emotional intelligence, right? Because that's how you get into a lot of companies.
Right.
So this guy had no coaching experience at all. Successful in a numbers way, but I would dare say an interpersonal genius, just put it that way. And we started to have the conversation, and he was trying to lump me into other areas that he was building. Well, I pay executive coaches, and now, mind you, I was going to run it, so I'm not getting paid that, like, forget that. But my life coaches and my executive coaches, the same thing. I'm like, stop the presses. I'm like, what? And I wouldn't even continue the conversation with him because I already knew he didn't know what he was talking about. And it's so disheartening to me. Like, you will meet people and, what do you do? Well, I'm a coach. I'm like, a little obnoxiously, but I try to be soft, like, oh, great. So I'm just curious, what qualifies you to do that? But what you said, though, about the certifications and stuff, what I listen for with anybody, even if I want to work with someone, and I'm curious how you feel about this, I want to feel their passion for it. So, for example, when we will go out to new people or a party, my husband will say to me in the car on the way there, Patty Ann, when people ask you what you do for work, they really don't want to know. Because we'll go out and I get so excited, and the person will turn to my husband and say, oh my gosh, she really loves this. He's
right.
like, you have no idea.
Right.
Is that a huge factor for you? Or is that like, of course?
No, I think it's important. I think passion is the fuel for purpose, right? So, you might have a strong purpose, but if you don't have that passion behind it, that enthusiasm, that intensity won't come through, because, it's the passion that's going to push you through those crappy times. When you don't have the energy, when you're tired, when business isn't going well, when, like, you're completely drained because you've spent, day upon day upon day just coaching and helping, right? It's the passion that's gonna fuel that. So I think that's really, really important. I'm a little weary of people that are too passionate, right? And at the risk of, like, making you too passionate. But,
I know what you said. Yeah.
Maybe too enthusiastic about it, type of stuff. Because there's a potential of being disingenuous,
dishonesty,
and not authentic. It's like,
but can't you pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're like, oh, they're so full of crap. They're trying too hard.
Correct, and hopefully you got a little bit of that radar that kicks in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The funny thing is, if you slow down enough, and if you shut up long enough, and if you listen long enough, right, people will show you exactly who they are. And you need to let them do so.
I tell people all the time, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time.
Correct.
The first time.
Dr. Patty Ann, you said a few things today where I'm like, man, we got those same lines, right? So
yeah,
it's
I am feeling a little self-conscious, though. I'll be totally honest, because, when I was saying that about my passion, I am like, I could not do any other. I'm no dummy, but I couldn't do any other work because I don't do anything I don't want to do. So if I don't care about it, I'm not going to do it,
Right. And that's where you're authentic, right? And when you use the word passion, I hear what you're saying, versus that what I was describing was, maybe we'll use a different word, the overly excited, enthusiastic individual, right? That is saying everything as a pitch instead of...
the buzzwords. They're trying to impress you. Yeah.
Correct. And I try to stay away from coach. People, even friends, they still don't know in some capacity what they do. They just...
So what do you do? Like, I freak out because people say, because I have the doctorate, right? Therapist. I'm like, I have nothing to do with therapy. That's a pathology model. Coaching is very different.
Right. So, I obviously own, or am the CEO of, a training and development company where we do...
Yes. Tell us about your company, Greg, please.
Okay, so Witz Education is a training and development company that does leadership development, sales, a lot of work around culture, and executive coaching. The original name of the company, and this was in the late 80s, was something called the Personal Development Institute. And
now, was that when your dad owned it?
Correct. And what we did was we ran personal development programs, intrapersonal skills, all built from the domain of psychology. In fact, my ex-partner, which I used to take this as an insult, but he would say it was a compliment, would call me a street smart psychologist.
Oh, that is a compliment.
I'd be like, well, what do you mean by that? Now he is a he is a PhD in clinical psychology and behavioral. And that was always my insecurity with him, which was, I was like, you're the PhD and I don't have a PhD, right? But he would say to me,
you know what PhD stands for?
What?
Coming from someone that has it.
Yeah.
BS, your bachelor's, MS, more of it, PhD, piled high and deep. Go. So now you'll never feel embarrassed, intimidated by that again.
Love that.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I am very proud of my degrees. I work really hard, but there's a lot of bull in it.
As you should be. And, you know, if I was a different academic student, I probably would have gone down the road, but I suffered and battled in school. I really had a hard time academically. And interesting enough, it was more with the environment and the teacher versus the actual subject, because, you know, I would go failing one subject and the next year I'd be getting 99% in it and be like, we don't understand how this kid goes from failing in the same subject to acing it. And what we said is it was the teacher. It was my relationship with that leader, that coach, right? So, you know, the company back to street smart psychology.
Interpersonal, yeah. I think street smarts is huge. I mean, that's where I tell people, you want my 13 years of college or my kid from Brooklyn response.
Correct.
Street smarts will get you every time.
And he would say, like, you've done as much learning and research and reading and adopting of these concepts as I have. You just did it in a roundabout way. You went this way and I went straight. And for the audience, I'm doing this big sort of circle around the mountain versus going straight up the mountain, right?
Well, so you did experiential, which is always more valuable than theory.
And that was always the way I learned, you know, there's a guy by the name of Kolb, Kolb, where he talks about adult learning and just the different stages that we have to go through. And I'm a concrete experience type of learner. Like, give it to me, I'll start touching it, feeling it, playing with it, pushing it, doing it. And then I'll start to process and go through, right? So the company, by the way, the branding is making humans better humans, because at the end of the day, from day one, we've been doing personal development. But in the 90s, we couldn't sell this because corporate didn't want personal development. It was taboo. And neither did individuals.
Back to Jack Welch's imprint. Go ahead.
I mean, I remember so many people coming in early days being like, okay, this is confidential, right? I can't have my company know that I'm doing this course. I can't let my wife or my husband know that I'm doing this course.
Wow.
Because it was taboo. Like, I got to learn communication skills. I got to learn emotional management. I got to learn assertiveness, right? I need to be more assertive with my kids. Wow. I want them knowing that I'm not assertive. Self-esteem was a big piece of that program, which is developing our confidence and our self-esteem, right? And understanding the difference between self-esteem and self-image and what are all the factors that go into this. And we changed the name to Witz, and that's the name that's been ever since. And it's created quite the strong brand. And, you know, today our effort and our purpose line is making humans better humans. And I don't care whether you're a leader or a supervisor or a manager or an entrepreneur or a mom or a dad or a kid or an adult. At the end of the day, you need to develop your people skills. You need to develop your interpersonal skills. You need to work muscles of self-awareness. And self-awareness is a very difficult topic. And what you were talking about earlier with the whole world of the assessments, the Colbys, the discs, the Myers, the parrots, the animal, the fish, the color, it's all known as what we call preference-based assessment. So the first thing to understand about preference-based assessment, and I think you know this, but for the audience, is that every time you fill out that assessment, you can get a different result because it is the mindset or the perspective that you're operating within the moment, asking those questions. Versus a validated personality assessment, doesn't matter how many times you fill that out, you are getting that same result, right? Because your blueprint is your blueprint, right? Your personality is your personality. And in our personality assessment, what we see most common happen is the person's self-scores or self-evaluation remains the same year after year after year. But what happens is other people's profile starts to change of them because there's a consciousness in how they're behaving. So back to self-awareness being a very difficult topic, this requires us to acknowledge our dysfunction more than our function. Self-awareness, the true exercise is going, what do I not do? Where is this not working for me? What are the muscles I need to develop? Not, look at me, I'm an analytical personality and I'm intelligent and I process wide loads of information at a very quick pace, right? Awesome. there's your narcissistic personality being inflamed.
Fixed mind feeds into the fixed mindset.
Correct. And we're just reinforcing what I was looking for, right? My confirmation bias or my perception. So if we could go through that type of exercise and really go through that exercise and then pack on tools thereafter, which were going to allow me to communicate differently with my kids. How do I respond instead of react? Right? There's no parents. You see all over social media today. Parenting hack number 1. Right? I saw a post the other day saying there is no such thing as parenting hacks. Right? You're screwed. Right? Was basically the post. So, but what we do know is the one thing that we're never taught well are how to navigate people. And when we look at
emotional, I always tell people, raise your hand if you took a course in history and math, right? Raise your hand if you ever took a course in emotional intelligence. Zero.
And where do we learn our emotional talents from? Our nurturance, our parental relationships.
Our parents, really. Yeah.
Right. I grew up with a very critical, reactive father. In fact, he passed away suddenly. Of
course, he did interpersonal development.
By the way, the reason the company started originally was because he was so mad. And when I say mad, he was a raging, critical, aggressive personality. I mean, this was like a dude, you didn't know what you were getting from him. Mm-hmm. And he passed away at 60 suddenly from cancer. But I believe that what really killed him was
his anger,
his emotions. Yeah. And my mother said this to me. She said, your father's greatest gift to you was his death. And what she meant by that was she said, we are 2 peas in a pod, genetically identical, emotionally and personality identical. And she said, what he's given you, right, is everything that you need to work on, right? So if you're not going to end up down that road, right, it's because you're not going to carry that type of anger and you're going to sort of learn different tools to manage it. And back to why he created the company, because in his own madness, he needed an answer. He needed to know, how do I deal with my anxiety, my depression? How do I manage my raging anger, right? What do I do to communicate more articulately?
He was searching for peace. And
he turned to psychology. And when he went to psychology, he went, I don't understand this. The principles are too big. The concepts are too, it's not relatable. And what he was very brilliant at doing was, and with the help of, a few others and, other psychologists that were part of the programs, develop these programs in a more simplistic manner, right? Creating new terminology for some of this stuff, taking a process that was quite complicated and simplifying it. And the whole exercise, the entire motivation to all of this stuff was, can I use it in the moment, right? Is there something I could use in the moment? And that was the birth of the organization. Anyway, 35 years later today, the organization is Witz. And we...
By the way, did you ever actually work with him?
Oh, yeah, for years.
And how'd that go down?
Oof. So as long as you understood what the pecking order was, right, it was fine.
And you were not the top dog.
Yes. And the other side of this was it was something interesting started to happen throughout the years of the company. Clients started to say, can you send the son in instead of the father? Right. And why? Because if I was to, toot my own horn or put a feather in my cap, because I have a gift. You talk about a gift when it comes down to emotional intelligence and coaching. I have that gift as well when it comes down to facilitating training and coaching. And that's how I got into this, right? It was forced. And the way I took it on was like, all right, well, I've been told to go do this. Let me go do it. And for many years, I worked for him, not for the purpose of the work. Mm-hmm. And it was very difficult working. I mean, there were early days that, he would come in my office and he would just go off, right? Yelling at him. Anyway, eventually I said to him, I said, Dad, listen, I can't do it anymore. Like every day you come in my office and you yell and you scream and you F this and F that. And I said, it's abuse. I said, like, you don't do this with anyone else. Me, I get berated and attacked and hammered every day. And it was 4 p.m. 4 p.m., the door, bang. I would cringe going, oh, it's 3:30. Oh, shit. It's 30 minutes before this happens, right? And he looked at me and he said, are you mad? He said, you're the only person I can communicate like this with, right? He's like, I come in because like, who else can I share and talk? And that's when I realized, I was like, hold on a second here. There's something different happening. And then there was many years of running interference, right?
Well, wait, what was the difference?
The difference was he wasn't yelling at me. He was emotionally vomiting, and he couldn't do that with anyone else.
Anybody
and
else?
Of the most important
so
things.
You were his whipping boy.
Yeah, in some regards. But when I realized that I wasn't on the end of the whip, that changed everything. And I think for people out there and for the audience, one of the things that we can control, even if we're in these types of relationships, is our perception to, are we being whipped, or, is this person reaching out for help? And yes, there's a fine line between toxic behavior and relationships, but sometimes it's not the person always just attacking. Sometimes what they're doing is screaming for help. And I say
always hurt people hurt people.
Correct.
Hurt people hurt people.
And at an unconscious level, what that person's trying to do, and for the audience, they're trying to get people to empathize. I need this person to feel my pain, right? Because then all of a sudden something happens. I'm not this weird person on an island by myself, the only person that feels it. There's relatability.
Well, you're validated, right? Your existence.
And hopefully I can share the pain, and it's not, the burden is not just on me.
Right.
So that's how the business began. But today, I mean, the work we do is everywhere from government to banks to extreme large rollouts to the individual entrepreneur.
You know what you said about the rollouts, I find interesting too. I didn't realize you did that, because a lot of the work that I do is when they're going to put out, I didn't even do this, when you're going to roll out something new, how to handle the objections, right? And you work with the leaders, you're like, you're right, who's going to be the naysayer, who's the cheerleader, who's going to say we can't do it, that will never work. And that's a whole thing, because most new things don't work because they're not processed appropriately. It's not that it's not a good idea.
Right.
And the leaders don't know how to get the buy-in, right? You have to get the buy-in.
Correct. I think we're very gifted in what we do, because our clients, and when I tell you 20 years, year after year after year, still working with these organizations, still training.
That's awesome. That is so awesome.
And it speaks to the credibility of the organization, but also the impact of the work. I had this happens often. I had a guy call me, this was several months ago. He was like, his name was Dan. He was like, hi, calling, I did your program, which was it's a 5-module program. Those modules go over about 3 months. There's one-on-one coaching in between, and it's developing the interpersonal skills. And he says it changed my life. And back then, you used to give us like these cassette tapes, right? So it's the whole program recorded on audio. In fact, I still have some of them. And I'm just wondering if you still have those, because I've lost them, and I would love to listen to them again. Of course, I said to them, well, no, we don't have any cassette tapes anymore.
How old are you?
I've got CDs, but in fact, I've actually got that program on iTunes where
online,
you can download the MP3s. Anyway, MP3 blew his mind. But I said, I got something better for you. We offer something called Freepeat, which is once you've come and done our programs, you could come and redo that program for the rest of your life. Right? Anyway, he came back to repeat the program. But what was so magical about that was he was able to recall so many of the concepts and the tools 20 years prior.
Because he internalized it.
Right. And, this is why we get out of bed every morning, right? Because this is the phone call you want to receive. I got a call in December from this individual, and you could tell she sounded like she was elderly, right? Like almost sounded like a grandma, like, hello there, dear. I'm wondering if, anyway, turns out she was like, they run this huge global business, and it's a family business, and the son's now the president CEO, and he's been running it for a few years. She's retired. She's like, I did the program 20 years ago, and it changed my life, and I want to buy that program again for my son and give it to him as a Christmas gift. And I thought, holy moly, this is powerful. This is impactful. So the work we do is that, and that's what the company is about.
That's great. Okay, so just you've been so generous with your time. I just have a couple more questions for you. What's the last book that you reread and why?
Wow. Last book that I reread. There's all the big ones, right? Highly Effective People, How to Win Friends. But I
The
was
last one.
I was just talking about this the other day. Gary Vaynerchuk's book called The Thank You Economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of his earlier books. I think it is his first book actually, but talks about, at the end of the day, how do we show up in this economy when it comes down to creating success? And it's an excellent book. I've got a few others that I could actually just drop some, which might the audience.
Sure.
If you're in sales, there's an author by the name of Jeffrey Gitomer. And one of the books he wrote, this big famous book is called The Sales Bible. But the one book that I recently just picked up again is called The Little Platinum Book, right? 32.5 ways to make your cash register ring. And it's a story of the guy that was selling cash registers back in the day. And no one bought the cash register. And after no one wanted to buy the cash register, because he went up and he said, hey, by the way, look, I've got this machine and you put money in it. And people went, no, not interested. Thank you very much. I got a little book. That he changed his approach. And he said, how do you know how much money people owe you? People said, oh, I've got this little book here that I keep written down. All right, well, what happens if you lose that book? Right? Oh, now I don't know who owes me money. Well, can I show you something called the receipt? And he sold the receipt and the machine happened to produce the receipt. It's an excellent book.
So is what is it? Sell them what they
sell them the what you
what
sell
they
them
want.
You sell them the outcome, right? The solution, not the machine.
The solution.
But the other part of the story was what I found so interesting was all the sales training he started doing with his team, because his team started to build, was more around physical health and mental health than sales training, right? Mm-hmm. Make him work out, and he would do mindset exercises and stuff even before it was called mindset.
Cool. All right. Then one more question. What is the one song that you cannot live without?
No Woman, No Cry by Bob Marley.
Why?
That is a song. I've traveled the world and I've had an incredible experience doing so. And that is a song that has popped up in some of the most extraordinary times and places around the world, that it has left such a visceral memory. And it's a very popular song, but it's one of those songs that just, has always been around.
I love what you said, because you said a visceral memory. Right. I love that. All right. So what is it you want people to know that, or answer the question I wasn't smart enough to ask?
What's the question that we could have asked? I thought all your questions were great today. So I don't know.
Thank you.
But maybe what's one thing we want people to not know, maybe be reminded of, right? Is at the end of the day, the power of choice and decision-making is the thing that we need to lean on sometimes the most. I think what we tend to do as people sometimes is we don't recognize the power of making having choice and making a decision, right? The other thing is, and I talk a lot about this, action creates the path. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we're so busy trying to figure out what is the path and what is the decision I should make, and is this going to be the right one? And what if we make this and it doesn't, blah, 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 and people spin themselves out of control. And sometimes it's simply by just making the decision to start walking that path, and the path will present itself. The path will become clear, but the path will only become clear when you're walking down it, not when you're standing back trying to search out this path so much.
Yeah, too much paralysis by analysis, right?
Correct. So action creates the path. Take one step at a time, and know the path can take different directions, right? We can veer left and we can veer right and we could veer off the path sometimes, but we will find our way back there. And
you'll create a path that didn't exist.
or you'll create a path that doesn't exist. So lean into the power of choice and decision making, because at the end of the day, that is going to take you to your path, and it is the action that will start.
That is great. I love that. Okay, so how can the listeners get more of your wisdom that I know they're going? Where should we send them? Make your full pitch. Unapologetic. Go.
And, well, to the audience, well, first let's just promote Dr. Patty Ann. If you like today's episode, don't forget to like it. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share it, because at the end of the day, it's about sharing these types of stories and
the ultimate connector right there.
Correct. But for me, if you want to get in touch with me, I am all over social media. We do a lot of content. We post multiple times a day. The exercise is always sharing good thought leadership. Greg Witz. WITZ, super simple. I'm going to pop up everywhere from TikTok to LinkedIn. On Instagram, you could search Greg Witz and I'll pop up. You'll see a little purple square with my face in it. But the actual handle is at GMWitz. My website, also super easy, witzeducation.com. You come and see sort of different programs, outlines, and stuff that we're running. And of course, we also have a podcast called the Better Human Podcast that I host, where we meet amazing people like Dr. Patty Ann, and we get to turn the tables on her and ask her all these questions.
I'd love to be a guest. If that's an invitation, the answer is yes.
It's a total invitation. So we'll follow up after this episode and we'll get that all scheduled. But the Better Human Podcast on all the main audio platforms, go check that out. And that's it. That's where you could find me.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. You have been so generous with your time and your wisdom. This was one of the most enjoyable podcast interviews I've done. So I truly appreciate it sincerely from the bottom of my heart. So thank you.